Thank you and welcome today to this very special session, one which is at a new time. It's 2 p.m. here in New York City, where I am right now on the East Coast of the United States. And we've made a new, well, Giles has made a new hybrid, as he called it, with a repeat of this session, partial repeat of this session tomorrow at 9 p.m. EST. Which we have done on purpose so we can get the Pacific audience in and the central time people in the United States, as well as mountain time. If you're skiing in Colorado, you will not be able to escape. Tomorrow at 7 p.m. you should be able to après ski join us about green IVF. So and of course the advantage is also in Australia and Asia. You'll be able to join around midday, depending on what time zone you are. The only problem, of course, at 9 p.m. EST, it's early morning in the UK and midnight, past midnight in Western and Eastern Europe. So for videos and previous sessions, please go to ivfmeeting.com. Thank you very much for logging in. I encourage you to ask your question, and we say this all the time, and it's still sometimes difficult to ask your questions, which we hope you'll have plenty. In the Q&A section of the conference service and not in the chat function. So when you click on the window that provides the Zoom information for you, don't click on chat. You can certainly chat in the chat function, but click on Q&A, which is all the way on the right side of the middle portion of the Zoom window. So this session is named by our producer and director, Giles Palmer, and he's calling it Green IVF with his own logo. We have 4 speakers together with the 2 moderators. It's 3 embryologists and 3 sustainability experts. So it's a really interesting combination of experts we have on the panel today. One of the presentations is sponsored by Feed2Life. We're very grateful for their sponsorship. So let's put it all in perspective. If we're talking today about IVF and green IVF in particular, or the absence of green IVF, but we have to look at it in a larger context. The healthcare industry is in its totality responsible for responding to many of the most dangerous effects of pollution and climate change. So that is great. And yet it is a significant source of greenhouse gases and other deadly environmental emissions itself. This was a statement from Jody Sherman and 3 other doctors, medical doctors who are also involved in sustainability and pollution. And they wrote a paper in JAMA 2 years ago. And they say, well, the US healthcare system contributes 10% of the nation's carbon emissions and 9% of harmful non-greenhouse air pollutants. And pollution has been associated with an estimated 9 million premature deaths worldwide in 2015, or 60% of all deaths. That's not an absolute association. It's a correlation with pollution and climate change. The majority of harm was from air emissions. Its rate of greenhouse gas emissions increased 30% between 2006 and 2016, the authors said. The healthcare sectors of the United States, Australia, Canada, and England combined emit an estimated 748 million metric tons of greenhouse gases each year, an output greater than the carbon emissions of all but 6 nations worldwide. So just think about that. We think about healthcare that we do good rather than bad, and this is one of the consequences. So now let's take that a step back and look at our own area that we are involved in vitro fertilization, assisted reproduction, and gynecology in general. IVF is growing at an annual rate of over 9% each year. If you look at other areas of healthcare, that's about 8.5%. So we're even going faster than healthcare itself. The IVF market will be $26 billion worth in 2026, only 4 years from now. It's now costing over somewhere between 15 and 20 billion already. enormous amount of effort put into our work. This is about 5% of the healthcare market, 5%. Given the nature of IVF treatment, it is likely that the per consumer portion of greenhouse gas emissions and pollution is higher for an IVF attempt than for most healthcare-related procedures. That's an assumption. It's hard to make that calculation precisely, but it's so labor-intense what we do, and so much dependent on environmental factors that it's likely that it is proportionally has a higher impact in other areas of healthcare. So if you take all those numbers and you cut it down and you look at it, then it could be assumed that IVF may be responsible for 0.5% of overall global pollution and greenhouse gas emissions. Just imagine that. So what, in context, about 10, 12 years ago, the digital industry, the internet, and anything to do digitally was responsible for 1% of global pollution and greenhouse gas emissions. So that's now close to 4%. So we don't want to have this amount, 0.5% increase even further, more than what it is now. What we need to do is stabilize it and diminish it with the aim ultimately to go to close to zero. And so how do we do that? I think there are ways to do that. This can be done. It should be done probably precisely and slowly in the next 10, 20 years, but we should start now and not wait with this. So my introduction, these were my introductory remarks. It's really a great honor to be co-moderating this session with Dr. Emma Saunders, who is a manager of an award-winning company in Wales called Genesis Biosciences. And Genesis Biosciences is at the forefront of the STEM industry in Wales, combining natural science with state-of-the-art biotechnology and genomics to develop innovative, sustainable, eco-benign products to replace harsh chemicals and waste remediation and industrial and institutional cleaning challenges around the world. And I have won a lot of awards in the last 3-4 years, Green Business of the Year, Technology Business of the Year. So it's an amazing organization, and we have one of the central people in that effort here with us in Emma. So welcome, Emma, and I'm really, really delighted you're here.
Thank you, Jacques. So, I mean, Jacques Cohen needs no introduction. He's the founder of this initiative. He's a reproductive biologist, a laboratory product developer, and high complexity laboratory director. He's director and founder of the Art Institute of Washington, co-founder of many popular products used in IVF Lab, and he currently serves on advisory boards of the biotech startup companies Tomorrow, Kindbody, Daddy, and Phosphorus. But what you don't know is that he's been a long-time supporter of sustainability, and anyone that knows him knows that he's deeply concerned about environmental issues and has been an example of remote working, alternative energy, and reducing the carbon footprint for many years, even before it became mainstream. So without further ado, I'd like to just thank you all for joining us today. And I can see there's people here joining from all over the globe, which is fantastic, because this is a global issue, and it's one that I think more awareness that everyone has around the globe is gonna help. So first of all, I would like to introduce our first speaker, who is Dani Smale. Now, her bio you will find in full on the website, but she's currently a locum embryologist, or per diem embryologist for our North American friends. But several years ago, when she was at CARE in the United Kingdom, she started an interesting investigation. So now I'm going to hand over to Dani and let us hear about plastic use in the IVF lab. Dani, over to you.
Brill, thank you for that introduction. So yes, I did this research back in 2018 at Care Fertility London, and it was just to sort of look at actually how much plastic do we use in the lab, and to kind of draw just bring awareness to it, because we do use a lot. So first things first, I've got no conflicts of interest and affiliations. So the aim of this research was to look at roughly sort of how much plastic were we using in fresh egg collections and FET cycles over a year in our clinic. And then I also subsequently looked at how much packaging that generated as well. And that was just packaging that surrounds the consumables, not sort of the delivery packaging or anything like that, but that's a whole nother sort of issue. Now, to do this, I looked at cycle data for 3 months, and I then used sort of calculations of how much sort of consumables I was using, and then just worked out an average. So all of my numbers are very rough, but it's just to give us a sort of an idea of what we would be using. And then I looked at how to reduce some of these consumables, and just like I said, raise awareness. Now, for the year, I estimated that we were using about 69,500 consumables, which equated to 22,800 pieces of packaging, which is a huge amount. And I sort of identified 3 main offenders where I thought, actually, by making small changes, we can try and reduce those numbers. So first things first, I looked at 14 ml tubes. So these are usually used in setup and then also during egg collections. And this is what we collect our follicular fluid in. So first things first, we saw that a huge number of these tubes were being used during egg collections. And I had a little look into it, and it basically equated to 19 tubes were being used on average to collect about 9 eggs in our clinic. One of the sort of reasons maybe for using so many tubes was potentially because we do favor a double lumen needle for our collections. But I thought this study is not long enough to go into that debate. So it is an area that I think actually for patients who have large follicle numbers, maybe using a single lumen needle might reduce the number of tubes that we're using in collections. But again, that I didn't look into that sort of any further. But one thing that I did notice was during our setup for egg collections, we used to set up 2 14 ml tubes with 5 ml of oil in each. Now, just a really simple change was to, rather than do it in 2 separate tubes, we just do 10 ml in one, and then we separate it out later. And just by doing this very small change, we managed to save approximately 896 tubes over the year. Which equates to about 90 pieces of packaging, which is a great start. So then the next one I looked at was center well dishes, because at the time, I don't know if they still are using this method, but we were putting 5 eggs per center well dish. Now, just by increasing the number of eggs per dish, whether it be 8 or 10, I don't think it would be necessarily sort of impacting the patient's treatment. But just by doing that, so if we increased it to 10, we'd be saving roughly about 444 dishes a year. And then just for my final sort of consumable that I targeted was 5 ml tubes. And this was during the transfer process. Now, what we used to do in our protocol is we used to set up 2 5 ml tubes for every transfer. One would have media in to clean out our catheter. And the second one would be used by the doctor to clean the cervix. Now, when we had a little look at this, we thought actually potentially this was a little bit not necessary, and it didn't sort of give any real benefit to the sort of outcomes of the transfers. So what we did was we got rid of that second tube, which was used for cleaning the cervix. And instead we used the galley pots, which were already provided in your transfer pack, and saline instead. And this basically helped us reduce the number of tubes being used by 1,354 a year. Now, the 2 sort of strategies that we actually implemented were the 5 ml tubes and then the 14 ml tubes during setup. So overall, over the year, we were saving, we're reducing our consumable use by 2,250, which goes to 224 pieces of packaging and also 9 kilograms of waste, basically. And obviously we're doing it out of the goodness of our hearts, but if you do run a business, it also saves you money. So being sustainable helps in a lot of different ways. But that was a whistle-stop tour of my research project, and I'll now pass it back over to you. any questions?
Well, thanks, Dani. That was great, and you put it together so well. It's so obvious. Of course, a question people would ask, because some people are worried, well, those big tubes, the 14 mil tubes. You know, we use this because we want to keep the area narrow. All our systems are adapted to it. So with all these changes you've made, and I think you probably could go a little further, I think, right? You probably be thinking about that already. So you save money, that's great. But has it affected outcomes? Do you get normal fertilization rates, normal blastocyst formation rate? Do you get the usual pregnancy rates? I'm sure, being from a large center when you did these studies, you must have looked at it.
Yeah, so before we sort of did a final change, we did sort of implement it slowly. And I mean, because all of the things that we were looking at were more actually in terms of setup, we didn't see any changes. The center well dish actually increasing the number of eggs per dish, we didn't actually do in the end, just because we were going through a phase of we were unifying our protocols. So I don't know if that has actually changed since I've left. But yes, every sort of procedure that we sort of altered, we would then obviously run a validation just to ensure that it didn't change any of the outcomes. But to be honest, most of them were within setup. So less so related, you mean it had less impact directly to the gametes themselves.
So that message needs to get across to everyone in our field, right? I mean, everybody can, you know, this is really not rocket science. It's just very down to earth and for a better world, really. So thanks very much, and I hope that you come back to the question and answers at the end of our panel discussion. Thanks again. It's my pleasure now to introduce Roisin O'Raghallaigh also from Wales. Good to see you today. Roisin is an embryologist. And she works for the Centre for Reproduction and Gynecology in Wales, CRGW, and she's working towards registration with Health and Care Professional Council in Wales. She completed her master's at Trinity College Dublin before starting her career in the field in, I think, around 2016 with the Marian Fertility Clinic in Dublin. She proceeded to gain experience in andrology at a variety of clinics and the European Sperm Bank before starting with CRGW in 2021. She has a particular interest in male factor infertility, fertility preservation, and sustainability within the IVF clinic. And she's also involved in the Girl Guides, where she finds new uses for much of the lab waste. So you're going to talk about how green is your IVF, and welcome.
Lovely, thank you, and thanks for having me on today. So yeah, my name is Roisin, and as Jacques has said, I am an embryologist or training in embryology. Sustainability is just something that I'm very interested in and passionate about. I wouldn't say I'm an expert in it, but hopefully through my talk today, I can help your lab become a little bit greener. So I have no conflict of interest. I'm just working as an embryologist with CRGW. So this quote I found quite interesting, following on from Jacques' talk as well, to say that if healthcare were a country, it would be the 5th largest emitter of greenhouse gases on the planet. So that's such a huge impact, the equivalent to 4.4% of global net emissions. And I think, Jacques, you were saying that 0.5% is estimated to be coming from IVF. So that is just huge. And as we see, it's going to be growing, and so will our greenhouse gases output if we don't change the way we're doing things. So there's loads of different waste that we generate in our labs and in our clinics. And according to the WHO, about 85% of the waste that we generate is non-hazardous. So this can be treated in the same way as domestic waste. and much of which is recyclable. And an NHS report then showed that 4% of the waste in a sharp bin actually isn't, or is only 4% of the waste in the sharp bin is actually sharp. So it's really worthwhile to review your waste management system and make sure that your staff and yourself are aware of what you're putting in what bin, and to make sure that you're disposing of waste correctly. In the lab, we use about 85% single-use plastics, which is a huge amount, and with about 2.5 million cycles of IVF globally, we're contributing hugely to the plastic planet. In our lab, we do about 13 to 15 cycles a week, and I looked at how much waste we generate in a week, and it came out that we throw out about 240 litres of general waste, 180 litres of clinical waste, and about 300 litres of recyclable waste. And yeah, how many people don't have a recycling bin in their clinic? I know I've worked in a few that haven't had any recycling bins even in it. So we're just putting all that waste into the wrong bin for no reason, really. So it's really important to try and do our bit as much as possible within the lab. It's also outside of the lab within the clinics, you know, every department is generating loads of waste. And here's just an example of a patient from London who went through 7 cycles of IVF, and in the process used 1,600 syringes and needles, you know, so just such a huge impact that we're having on the environment to bring these babies into the world. So this slide just shows what we use in our lab alone for fresh cycles, only for fresh cycles. We're generating about 25,000 pieces of single-use plastic a year, not taking into account errors or training that might need to be done. So it's really about time that we start to think of ways that we can change the single-use plastic either into reusable dishes or getting our plastic from a different source. So most plastic is sourced from crude oil. It's a really dirty source. It can't be broken down easily, and it lasts on the planet pretty much forever. It's not just plastic though that's contributing to the IVF carbon footprint. It's coming from all different areas. So it's coming from the transport, bringing samples back and forth to the clinic, as well as all of our supplies. It's the cold storage that's necessary to keep the medicines, the media, and the samples cold and you know, suitable temperatures. Then it's the energy that we need to run the lab, the gases that are produced to keep the embryos at them in optimal conditions, and the packaging as well. So it comes from all different sources. Transport, we're transporting everything pretty much into the lab, all the media and consumables. It's worthwhile to think about where you're sourcing your products from. So I saw this week on one of the media that we use, it's coming from Costa Rica. So that's a huge journey for a little vial of media to be doing. And, you know, like, think about if we could be sourcing our supplies from more local suppliers. In our clinic alone last year, we did 140 imports and exports, and the majority of them were coming from America. And a lot of those shippers were containing only 1 or 2 straws. So it's just incredible how much unnecessary journeys that we're making from the same kind of transport, you know, from the same company. Yeah, so I used to work for the European Sperm Bank, and they do about 6,700 shipments a year. They are a really good example of a company, a fertility company, that have taken initiative to put sustainability in place. They make a conscious effort with their shipping to bulk up, you know, so if you have 2 or 3 patients ordering from European Sperm Bank in a short space of time, they'll try and put as much in the tank as possible. And they've also conducted a sustainability audit, and they've adopted 3 of the Sustainable Development Goals to work towards. And they have a 44-page report that you can access on their website if you want to get any ideas or inspiration in the About Us section and UN Global Compact. So it's just a really good example to show that a fertility clinic, it's not impossible for us to do this too. So what else can we do? So we can try and adopt the 5 R's. So refuse, so like try and work with suppliers to refuse unnecessary packaging. And we all know how much unnecessary packaging comes with deliveries. Sometimes you're getting a huge styrofoam box with just 1 bottle of media in it. It's a complete waste. So work on refusing that excess packaging, reducing your usage of materials where possible. So that was a great talk by Dani to look at your labs and see where your plastic consumption is coming from. Also your media, you know, look at ways that you can review your protocols and look at ways to reduce your usage. Reuse where possible, so switching from single-use things to reusable, and I'll have a few examples of them. Repurpose or upcycle. So I know we've had great engagement from the social media, the i3 social media, of people's upcycling, and I'll show a bit of that. And then as a last resort, recycle. A lot of what we actually put in the recycling bin doesn't get recycled. Only 2% of plastics are purposely recycled, meaning that they're recycled into something that's going to have a longer life. So it's really worthwhile to put recycling at the bottom of the list. Try and work with sustainable suppliers if possible. I know that we're a small field, so we only have a few suppliers that we can work with. Look at conducting a sustainability audit with your clinic. So this doesn't have to be a big sustainability audit. You can just take a step back and look at ways in your clinic that you can make changes to become greener. And use green energy providers. So if your energy providers are sourcing their energy from renewable sources, that means you're powering your clinics environmentally friendly. Think about adopting more virtual consultations. I think the pandemic has been great for that, to be having off-site visits so people aren't making unnecessary journeys to the clinic, as well as having staff work from home where possible. So it's about building a framework that we can work towards as the fertility industry, and we need to collaborate all together. This is a relatively new field for us all, so it's great that we can collaborate together and share our ideas, and social media is there for us to be able to do this. So this is just an example, similar to Dani, like how small changes can make a really big impact. So one of my colleagues, Ledin, he had this idea. So we switched in our embryo transfer setup. We went from 14 mil tubes down to 5 mil tubes, and reduced the amount of media from 5 mils to 2 mils. And we also got rid of the 11 mil tube that we used, that had 7 mils of media in it, and went down to just preloading a syringe with 2 mils of media. So we do around 260 embryo transfers, frozen embryo transfers a year, and around 600 cycles. So we're already saving about 1,000 pieces of plastic a year, plus the media, and the financial impact of that was a saving of around £7,000 a year. So just these small things, that's something so basic, made such a huge saving on the planet and the pocket. We also had another colleague who switched from doing needle-assisted hatching, or no, collapsing, to laser collapsing before vitrifying. So again, like we've saved 2 needles on a dish per freeze, as well as the media. So little things like that are available if you just review your protocols and see where there's ways to make changes. Some other small changes. So I know that a lot of clinics are still using disposable caps. I'm not sure why, when there's a really great alternative, reusable caps. So if we average that, each embryologist is wearing a cap a day. So you would be 225 caps per embryologist per year. If you have 10 embryologists in your clinic, that's 2,250 caps a year that you're just putting into landfill when there's no need for that. Again, there's a financial saving as well. Another thing is the disposable hand towels. That's probably the main thing in our general waste bin. It's just full with tissues from washing our hands going in and out of the lab. We probably go through about 30 towels each a day. And there are alternative solutions out there. So there's these ones called, they're bamboo paper towels. They're single use in a way, because you just use them once, but then you wash them and you can bring them back and reuse them. So that could be a really good option, and that could save about 70,000 paper towels going in the bin each year. So there are lots of little ways to make a big saving on the planet. And it doesn't have to stop in the lab. So here's a really good example of something that's available to us. So these are biodegradable pregnancy tests. They were developed by these 2 ladies in the States, and they are FDA approved, and they biodegrade in 10 weeks, and they're made of the same material as toilet paper. Yeah, they have the same result as a plastic pregnancy test with 2.5 million cycles a year. We could be saving a lot of plastic by using these, and they weren't crazy expensive. I think 2 of them are about $15. So I think that's pretty affordable. So yeah, here are some examples of the upcycling we've done in our lab. So the styrofoam boxes is probably the thing we all hate the most. It brings so much environmental guilt to throw one of these in the bin, and they probably don't degrade for a few thousand years at least, and they're in perfect condition. So we're going to upcycle these into ottomans, but another colleague had a much better idea to use them for fish, to get in touch with fishermen. So I just emailed a few fishing societies around, just a quick Google search, and we've been put in contact with a fishing society in Wales, and we just give our things, some of our boxes to them, which is great. I've also put them up on the Facebook Marketplace or Olio or Gumtree, these sort of apps, and people actually just come and pick them up. They're great for small businesses. So it's really minimal effort, and we're making a big saving and helping people out at the same time. I was contacted by one of the big suppliers to say that they have a compostable solution that performs better, and have started to replace their styrofoam boxes. So it's really promising to see that there are actually, more eco options on the way. So that's that one. Here's another upcycling of mine. This is foam that we get in one of our cold deliveries, and I've upcycled it into these sponge things, as you can see here. They're also great if you have anybody that does felting, which is a type of needlework, and they can be used in that as well. So reaching out and getting in touch with local groups is also a great way to find second homes for your waste. And it's been great fun as well with all the engagement that's come through the i3 social media. There's heaps of ideas out there. So somebody here is using the olive oil glass bottles as spice jars, toothbrush holders, also I think they're lights or candles, and decorating them, you know. So there's really a lot of options for these. Also some other suggestions that came through social media. People were using, again, the olive oil bottles to store olive oil in and make salad dressings, because they fit really tightly, they don't leak. So that's really great. Using them as toys for their kids, all the plastics on the tubes, and doing science projects at home. Somebody's even using them for their baby teeth. So yeah, there's a lot of really great options out there, and even just recycling the soft plastics in the lab that can't go into the regular recycling bin. Some recycling centres actually take that. So there was one person who takes it upon herself to recycle them as well. So yeah, so hopefully we have, through this talk today, we're going to be like kickstarting the revolution for green IVF, and trying to make the field a more attractable place, you know, for green business as well. And I think it's important as well that, like, in today's world where everybody is becoming more environmentally conscious, that as clinics we're kind of putting ourselves out there, that we are becoming a more sustainable business. To, you know, it can help to attract more customers as well to your clinic. So yeah, that's my talk.
Thank you, Roisin. That was a fantastic talk, and you know, it's really fascinating to see just what can be done with some of these items that aren't biodegradable, and this idea of upcycling and repurposing and reusing, so it's not single use, is absolutely fantastic, and a great initiative. I think what's really impressed me about your talk today as well is the level to which you've gone to actually you know, measure, analyze, and then quantify the issues that you see in the lab, measure the waste and quantify that. And I think you've really been able to identify areas that need improvement. And, you know, in some respects, you have the beginnings of an environmental management system right in your hands, because you have the data. Have you ever considered looking at an external body to come and certify you under an environmental management system, just to give you certification to that end?
Yeah, I have. I haven't found a huge amount out there. There was one company in the UK, they were called Green Labs, and they seemed quite good, that they could provide more of an, because for IVF, I haven't seen anything that's actually catered towards IVF. So this company, Green Labs, they were able to work with small businesses and that. But yeah, there's a real demand for that out there, because it is a lot of work to audit the whole clinic, you know, and I suppose we're not experts in the field, so we'll probably overlook a lot of things. So yeah, there are options out there, and I think a lot of the sustainable engineering and sustainable audit companies would be willing to work with clinics as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've got a few questions actually that have been posted, so maybe we could just ask a few questions if you've got time. So the first, in fact, is an interesting point. You know, it's around you know, giving incentives. So Juan Marino from Oslo has asked a few questions around giving companies incentives to actually, you know, such as discounts in price if they have a recycling program for their derived plastics. One of the other points he made was the use of plastic vaginal speculums instead of metal washable ones is a huge, that would remove a huge amount of plastic each year. Have you got any views on that one, Roisin?
Yeah, I think it's sad in a way that we've come from, I know like some of my more established colleagues in the lab talk about in the olden days how they used to like use their and blow their glass pipettes, and now we're using all like disposable plastic ones. So like it's a shame that we've moved away from reusable sources that are out there to plastic for no apparent reason that I can see.
Yeah, and Julia Collier commented, what would it take for vendors to have a supply return program? Is it simply not cost effective? Vitrolife used to send a return label with their shipping materials, and so they were always able to return ice packs or styrofoam boxes, but this no longer exists. But that's another concept that I think would be very successful and a lot of labs would adopt.
Yeah, I think that would be brilliant to be able to return your styrofoam boxes because they're in perfect condition. They can be reused. It's just, there's as much as we can try and give an upcycle and like give a second life to it, we're getting the volume of what we get is so high, there's not always a way to make a second use out of it. So yeah, it would be perfect if we could just return it. But I think, yeah, it might not be financially viable, or there might not be a financial benefit to these companies to have it returned.
Yeah, thank you so much, Roisin. That was a fascinating talk. And we're going to move on to our next talk for this evening, or for this morning, or this afternoon, depending on where we're situated. This talk is sponsored by Vitrolife, and we have with us Rikard, Ledin, Rosa to answer the question, why does the Sustainable Development Goals matter for the IVF business? Rikard is a sustainability specialist at Vitrolife. He's an inspector and auditor for several environmental management systems, and he helps organisations understand what sustainability means for them, what motivators they should focus on, and how to make sustainability an integrated part of their core business. So thank you for joining us today, Rikard. Over to you.
Thank you very much. So just starting off, as you mentioned, I'm representing Vitrolife. We're a Swedish company founded back in 1994. We had approximately 400 employees up until recently, where we acquired a new company. So I think we're somewhere over 1,000 employees now. And we are, of course, a global company that many of you know, contributing with products within the IVF field. The pipettes and the styrofoam boxes that you've all talked about already. And of course, we have a big impact in our business, and I'm going to get into that more. But before that, I'm just going to do the short disclaimer that I'm an employee of Vitrolife Group. So when I talk now, I'm going to talk about our approach to sustainability and how we decided to do it. So this is one way of doing it, and there are many others. So just to start off, why should we focus on sustainability? Why should Vitrolife decide to integrate sustainability in everything we do? And I think that goes back to what many of you already talked about, our prerequisites for the future. As many of you know, our economy is pretty linear and affects our other systems, the society and the biosphere, heavily. So the way our economy looks right now, our business as usual cannot proceed in the future without changing the prerequisites that we're used to driving our business, that will in turn affect our societies. We can take, for examples, many companies are already affected by changes in the biosphere and societies as well, where you can see an international trade with insects and bumblebees for juice companies, for example, pollinating their fruit trees and so forth, having big impacts on both economy, society, and the biosphere. So for our part, we have decided to ensure sustainability in everything we do, to capture the opportunities, of course, that comes with this, and be a part of driving the change for a more sustainable future, but also mitigating the risks that we see in the future. And in order to do that, we need to figure out what does sustainability means for us. And what we did was to take a step back and look at what does sustainability mean? What does sustainability mean in the global arena? And we started with the Brundtland Commission back in the 1980s, where the kind of international community together decided that sustainable development is the development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And I think that that is especially important for our industry, focusing on the IVF market, where we actually are part of creating the next generation. So that also falls in very well in the reason for us to focus on this subject so hard and want it to be an integrated part of our company, of our core business going forward. So talking a bit more about sustainability and what it actually means, what we started off doing was continue looking at what does the international community say about sustainability and what do we need to focus on going forward. If we start off with the 1990s, we talked a lot about pollution and climate. We had the Montreal Protocol, which is actually one of the most successful international agreements, where we changed the way we used chemicals protecting the ozone layer. But going from that, the Kyoto Protocol and the agreement to change the way we are releasing carbon dioxide and other gases that affect our climate, we went into the 2000th century, where the Millennium Development Goals were developed by the international community. So we went from talking about sustainability for the next generation to actually put several layers into the sustainability concept, where we now have 8 layers. So in order to describe what a sustainable future is, we have to talk about 8 different parts that sustainability consists of in the global context. The challenge with the Millennium Development Goals, although they were pretty successful, was that these were developed by nations, for nations. So it was very hard for companies to adopt these goals and start working in line with them. That changed when we go further in time to 2015, to be exact, where the Sustainable Development Goals came into place that precedes the Millennium Development Goals, or takes over. And from that, sustainability has been has to be even more layers to it, where we now have 17 sustainable goals in order to drive a sustainable future. So we have 17 different layers that we need to be aware of. And another strong thing about the Sustainable Development Goals for the future is that they also consist of 169 targets. So there's even more layers into it. And on top of that, one goal can't be reached without reaching many of the others. So there's an interconnectedness between these goals. So we can't just look at climate change without focusing on poverty, for example. And we can't look at only circularity without looking at climate change. Because if we have a one-sided perspective, we might impact other goals negatively. Let me take an example. The styrofoam boxes that we talked about before, we had the service where we took back the styrofoam boxes from a circularity perspective. We wanted to help companies do that. But when we started to measuring our greenhouse gas emissions, we actually found out that taking back the styrofoam boxes has a bigger impact on the environment than just letting the styrofoam boxes be. So there we had to make a decision. Do we work in a more circular way, continuing with taking back the styrofoam boxes, or should we focus on the climate action part and work more with reducing our emissions? And the way we have moved forward is to focus on climate change, because we all agree that that is a pressing issue, a global pressing issue. But we still have many activities going on trying to combat the effect or the circularity perspective of it. So another part that is very interesting with the Sustainable Development Goals, and the reason why we focus on them is that they were also developed not only by nations, but also by companies. So there was a global community of non-governmental organizations, companies, nations, interest organizations, and so forth, that together develop these goals that will take us up until 2030 in the direction we need to go as a global community to drive sustainable development. So this is the roadmap for the global society to 2030 and beyond for many of the goals, going up to 2040, 2050 as well. And it has been adopted by UN member states, and as I mentioned, set the global development agenda. Why is this important then? As many of you mentioned, or as we heard in the previous talks here, our way of doing business today is very linear. And what I mean about that is that when we do business today, we take virgin materials up from the ground or from other places and create them. And then we make products from them, we use them, and then we dispose them. The main activities is burning or just bury them under the ground. And that is the linear way of doing business. And that we need to move from in order for us to be able to continue doing business as we do today. That has many implications. And if we look at the circularity report, we are only 8.6% circular as of 2021. So over 90% of everything that we consume during 1 year is linear. So that is an astonishing amount. But looking further, this also creates a lot of opportunities, and it also creates we also have a pressure of doing this right, because as I mentioned, these goals are interconnected. So while we're focusing on circular economy and climate change, we also have to focus on development in many parts of the world. So we can also move forward with the no poverty part. Hans Rosling, a Swedish scientist, put it that the more wealthy parts of the world should focus on the sustainability part, so that the other parts of the world can focus on the development part. But their development have to be more sustainable than our past development has been. And that is a mission for us as companies, to make sure that when we're doing business, that we are doing it more and more sustainable. And also when we capture new opportunities, enter new markets, that we help these markets be more sustainable and do it even better than we've done in the past. And we can also see that these global goals, these 17 SDGs, are a global policy that all these nations in the UN Assembly has agreed that we should take these goals and these targets and integrate them into our national frameworks and policies. We see this in the European Union. We've recently seen it in the United States again. That's very good. And many other countries are putting it into their national policies, doing efforts to align themselves to the goals in order to reach them to 2030 and beyond. And this also means new regulations for us as companies. But it also means a responsibility for us as companies to help countries reach these goals, because companies have a big impact and are really important in doing this. So how are we supposed to do that? So we need to make these global goals our local business. So we need to act here and now, while we at the same time steer strategically in the future. Because as you mentioned, there are a lot of things we can do here and now. But if we look a little bit back again, if we only have the small perspective, looking at our own factory, our own industry, our own employees, that won't be enough. We have to look further and beyond that today. And that is what makes sustainability complicated as well. Because today we have to focus on where do we get the materials from? Do we have an impact there? Are there conflict minerals? How are they mined? The plastics, are they used, the virgin materials, or are they reused? How do we transport it? And here again, an example that we talked about before, one of the previous presentations, where we as a company also have a challenge, because we want to meet the demands of the customer when the customer wants to place an order. But if we have very small orders, we have a lot of transportation and we will have a big climate impact. But if we can put bigger orders and make better structures to have bigger orders in a more systematic way, we can decrease the number of transports and decrease our impact on the environment. And on top of that, we also need to think about the products that we actually produce and their impact in the next step. The styrofoam boxes or the pipettes or the plastic. And from there, we also have to do things to try to minimize it and help our customers do the same. But the reason for this is that this impacts both our business. There are economic benefits, but it also is strongly connected to our brand or all our company's brands. But from this value chain, different industries have different impacts. So focusing on the IVF value chain, when we worked with our impact on the world, starting with the Sustainable Development Goals as an umbrella, that we see that this is the way that the world is going forward, and we need to move along with these goals. But in order to do that in the right way, we need to understand our impact on the world from these 17 different perspectives and the 169 targets. So therefore, we started off with analyzing our value chain from our research department to the materials that we mine or that we buy from different companies, our suppliers, to the products that we actually produce, and to the actual customer side of it, and the final product itself, creating new babies. And from that, we identified a total of 35 different sustainability issues that we need to focus on. And we also identified that we had 27 different stakeholder groups. And stakeholder groups is groups that are impacted from our business or can have an impact on us from our business. So from our value chain analysis, we identified these different material issues for us. And going forward from that, when we have a better picture of our baseline, this is the impact we have on the world, this is all the issues that we need to focus on, and we also have the picture of these are the stakeholders that we need to talk to and work together with. We need to move forward from that and integrate it into our core business. And in order to do that, we talked a little bit about the management systems. That is one way of doing it, and it's an excellent way. But there are a lot of different frameworks out there. There are frameworks for reporting in the right way. There are frameworks for integrating the right kind of policies, focusing more on the climate change part of it. There are also the talk about the more KPIs part of it, the ESG reportings. So there are a lot of different ways of actually integrating sustainability into your business. And in order for us to find the right way to do this, we looked at our impact of the world and looked at all the different frameworks and tried to map out which are the ones that are most known in our industry and which are the ones that we think can help us make the shifts that we need moving forward in the best way. And when we did that, we tried to do that with two things in our back of our minds. Because in order to achieve sustainable development, we need to act here and now, while we're at the same time steer strategically into the future, working both with the short term, here and now, and the long term. Because we need to make actions here and now. We need to change our lightings into more sustainable lightings, doing things like that to decrease our impact straight away. But we also have to make bigger shifts, more long-term initiatives, maybe changing the type of plastics within our pipettes or our consumable parts. But that is a long-term perspective or an issue that may be so hard that we can't do it alone, where we need partnerships from other players in the industry. So we need to start partnerships, and we need to start to talk to legislators so that we can use recycled plastic, for example, and try to tear down barriers for us to move forward together, moving towards the SDG ambitions, the Sustainable Development Goals. And for the short-term perspectives, we took all our 35 sustainability issues that we found in our value chain analysis, the baseline assessment, and we put them in a materiality matrix where we did a materiality analysis. And the framework that we followed here was GRI standards. So what we did there was that we looked at here and now from these different sustainability issues that we actually have an impact on in our value chain, which are the ones where we have the biggest impact, economic, environmental, and social. And then we put them in the table. And in the next step, we talked to our stakeholders and asked our stakeholders, which issues are most important for us to work on from your perspective? And then from that, we had a result where we could put the less material topics in the bottom and the more material topics in the top. And this is, from our perspective, or from our analysis, the results. So our major impacts, the issues that we should focus on the most is our product quality and performance. Partly because if we have better products, better quality and better performance, we don't need to use as many products to have a successful IVF treatment. As well as innovation and R&D are super important for us in order to find the new ways of doing things, to find a new type of materials and so forth and so on. So this is a short picture of the results from our here and now analysis, our materiality analysis. And when looking more at the long-term perspective again, so we have the short term, we have from our value chain analysis, we have the issues that we should focus on. We once again look at the more long-term perspective. So from these 35 different material issues that we have, or the issues that we have throughout our value chain, how do they align with the Sustainable Development Goals? Where do we have the biggest touch points? Which Sustainable Development Goals is most important for us? Both how the Sustainable Development Goals or the movement of the global community will impact us, but also our impact on the global community's ability to reach the goals. So from that, we identified that 10 of the goals had higher importance for us as a company to work towards. We have the partnerships as an example, as I mentioned before, but we also have climate action and sustainable consumption and production. So these goals help us create our long-term focus. What is most important for us to focus on this decade to come? And from that, and these insights, we have created our new sustainability framework, our sustainability themes going forward, where we have mapped out from our business perspective. So we made 4 different sustainability themes for our long-term sustainability efforts moving forward, trying to maximize our success hand in hand with our overall group strategy. So important to note is that these sustainability themes is closely interconnected with our business strategy or group strategy. This is not a separate thing. This is issues that are used as a lens when we talk about what the strategic initiatives for our business should be going forward. And the reason why we do this is to, of course, as I mentioned during the talk, to mitigate the risks and capture the opportunities for the company. It also is in order to minimize negative impacts, provide transparency, and maximize positive impact in order to create a truly sustainable business. But important here, and my final notes, is that, of course, we've been working with sustainability for a long time, but we had a lot of different initiatives, and it's been more of, as for many companies, you do sustainability things and activities and initiatives, but in order to really integrate into the business, we have to make sure that it's integrated both top down, but also bottom up. So another important issue for us during this process that we've been working on the past year now is to really include the organization. So we've had a bunch of workshops talking about sustainable development, what it means for us, what our impact actually is, and how we should move forward. And within that, we've found a lot of different interesting initiatives that are already in place, things that we need to do to minimize our negative impact today, but also big opportunities where we actually can grow our business going forward. So this provides a solid base that enables us to move forward in a more sustainable way. But of course, we can't do it alone. We need to do it together with other parties, our customers, suppliers, and other people in the business or in the industry. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Rikard. Fabulous presentation, thorough, well thought through. And you really raised a lot of questions. In actual fact, our panel of people who work on the triage of all these questions has barely been able to keep up. So I'll just ask you quickly one or two. There's somebody in the audience, there are a lot of people in the audience interested in this topic, and they're down to earth. I mean, you're looking at the global picture of the boxes. You mentioned at some point 169 areas that you're looking at. For us as embryologists, we're kind of down to earth. And so the questions are a bit more down to earth than maybe the level where you have been presenting. But Juan Moreno has asked many questions with the previous speakers and again now. And he and others are wondering, media that last longer could reduce culture medium that last longer could reduce the amount of orders. Is it possibility for reconsidering expiration dates and formulations? You could, I mean, the culture media production is a revolution. However, it's kind of quiet in the area of now, how can we really improve things?
Yeah.
Like Julie Collier also has made similar remarks. Expiration dates, where are those based? What are those based on?
Yeah, that is actually a question that we work really hard with, and we really try to create as long as expansion dates as we can. I can come back more in detail tomorrow when I talk to some of my colleagues, but I do know that we work really hard with trying to keep the balance of not producing too much, so we ourselves don't create too much waste, so we can send it to the customers when they have the longest possible usage period connected to the expiration dates. But we also have a lot of projects trying to create new kind of medias that have longer dates that can be used for more time. And it's a high priority for us as well. But one thing that is hard for us and in this business is, of course, all the regulations in it. And that's one thing that I found really interesting in this perspective as well. For us to make changes in products or even small things connected to the products, it could take up to 5 years with all the permissions in different regions of the world and so forth. But it is a question that we work with, and I think it's a really important one.
Yeah. Another similar question, again, Juan Moreno, but also others, is about the other area of culture medium is you covered with mineral oil, which is an oil-based, geological product.
Yeah.
Obviously incredibly polluting. So is there any research going on that you know of within your company, regarding maybe using a sustainable oil, vegetable oil, somebody is saying, and what happens to the oil or side products? Now, I think in all fairness, Fetal Life has done a great job in producing culture media and products locally. Certainly in the United States, you chose a very good location in the middle of the center of the country, rather going to the coast, which is what usually most people do. Most companies do. You chose Colorado many years ago, 20 years ago or longer ago than that. So that's an advantage. But you still, where I am, it's still 4 hours flying to Colorado. So it's a huge country. In Europe too, you have several locations. Is that the same for Asia? I know I'm asking a lot of questions here, but coming back to oil, I think that is a pertinent question from the audience that I'd like to know your opinion about.
Yeah, once again, I'll love to come back to that issue, but from what I know about it, is that, of course, that is one issue that we also work with in the efforts to minimize our impact. However, I think last time I spoke to one of our researchers, it was connected both to legislative issues, that it's hard to change it, but also to the fact from the effect of it. That is that we can't risk the effect of the product, and once again, that's where it gets interesting and complicated within sustainability again. Should we go
you have to
from the oil-based one, the more fossil oil-based, and maybe risk the quality of the products, And that in turn has effects on sustainability. Or should we stick to the fossil-based oil for now and continue researching?
Yeah, no, these are good points. Obviously, you would have to do a lot of research before you validate a new product like that. It would be a massive step.
Yeah.
And I think also in the defense of Feed for Life and other companies like Feed for Life, there's been a tremendous effort in reducing the amount of mineral oil needed, from rather going to complete open dishes or 4-well or very large volume dishes, going to, in the case of Feed for Life, to the embryoscope and reducing the amounts of culture medium and therefore the amounts of mineral oil for just one patient has been a massive progress there. But not everybody can necessarily afford time lapse right now. I hope that will change. But you see that also with other Petri dishes that have been developed, that there is much smaller volumes being used. And therefore the amount of mineral oil being used can be reduced as well. And also you could measure to see how much you really need per dish. So I think there are ways like Roisin and Dani have said before, you just go down to the level of the lab and see what difference it makes, and you keep track of results carefully. And so there are definitely things that we can do in the lab as well, and not only comes from Feed for Life or companies like Feed for Life.
But I think also that's where it gets really interesting, where we can find collaborations with each other, partnerships, in order to improve our products or reduce our impact even further together.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, on that note, and we'll come back to you and others later in our final discussion. On that note, it's my great pleasure to introduce our last speaker, looking at the building of the IVF Lab and what it all is about, including patients and doctors and embryologists. All of that has a footprint as well. Chip Calcagni is a good friend. I've worked with him for 25 years, but he's been 35 years in the business as a practicing architect. He's been on our forum, I think, about 2 years ago. And he's led teams really worldwide, international, as well as private projects, higher education. He's worked with very well-known institutions like New York Presbyterian, Rutgers University, Memorial Sloan Kettering, Vanderbilt, Weill College Medical Center, Care London, we used to call it CRM, Care London, that was designed by him, the University Hospital Cleveland, Barcelona University, Medical Center, etc., etc. You can find his CV and his impact on our industry on the website and look there, because we're running a little short on time. So Chip, great to have you here talking about green applications in IVF and taking the longer view. Welcome.
There's nothing worse than trying to limit an architect from talking too much. So I will do what I can to try and keep things salient. To begin with, I want to say that I work with Tomorrow, which is a automated frozen storage for embryos. So that would be my immediate qualification on what we're saying. Are my slides moving, Jacques?
I didn't see them move yet. I can see the first slide, but not.
There we
go. I would close it and then open it up again, because usually that has an effect. Maybe it was on presentation mode before.
Right. So
now it moves.
Now we got there. Hi, everybody. Thanks so much. When I was an architect, and about 15 years ago, there was a lead initiative to try and make our work greener. And I was irritated by that, because I felt that I was pretty much powerless, that no matter how hard I worked for clients that had demands, and that what little could I possibly do to change things. And that made me seem ineffective, and I felt angered. And it's turned out that actually construction creates a huge amount of waste, and there are differences that can be done and applied. So I'd like to suggest also that the culture of IVF is one of constant introspection and checking. And yes, there are big global initiatives that can make a huge difference, but if you are able to work at it personally in your small area and just change some of these aspects, first of all, you'll save a great deal of money. And second of all, you'll become more efficient. And that's a process that you go through all the time when you're making sure that your results are good and that you're actually achieving pregnancies and that your outcomes are good. So the same process can be applied to this by putting a team together and working inside. So in other words, I'm going to try and suggest that it should be financially based first and foremost. And I think that all of our speakers have pointed out how it's financially beneficial to go through this process. It makes it worth the pain in the process of doing it. And if you can put a team together within each of your organizations, you can greatly help solve these problems at a practical level. So the idea of green initiatives are basically this triple bottom line of people and the planet and prosperity. And all of that is great stuff. But if we can actually justify it by meeting our bottom lines, because it is very difficult to operate an IVF facility and operate any business in these days. So the ability to be able to apply that and make it worthwhile as a business effort really justifies the process in terms of doing it and the costs involved with it, and it will create a return for you. COVID has changed the way we do things. I mean, here we are meeting across the globe on a virtual meeting. This wouldn't have been thinkable 5 years ago, but COVID has changed how IVF is delivered. And this technological change is going to challenge and create cost impacts going forward. So the suggestion that we apply certain kinds of technologies now while you can, and then being faced with the costs of the time-lapse process by embryoscopes, automated frozen storage and storage solutions, automated ICSI by companies like Overture, Gavi's now automated vitrification. You can see that automation is coming fast. It isn't inexpensive. It will provide results and bottom line numbers that are more directly applicable. But if you look across the entire fabric of your organization, using these things now and changing so that you have less expensive energy use is going to save you money to be able to put into these technologies that are coming and are going to change the very way in which you work. So a lot of places are now going through new construction processes where they're building new labs. And one of the most economical ways to do that is to create one that is future-proof and actually doesn't rely on today's technology, but can create enough flexibility without creating redundancy and having 100 different gas lines everywhere, but enabling you to be able to move your laboratory around and flex it throughout its process of operation is actually a green technology. So if you're anticipating that, really addressing flexibility with movable furniture, location of power and outlets and gas lines is really, really important because it will allow you to not have to spend more going forward. Once these technologies are embraced, then the practice of actually having to have patients is going to change. So your clinic area is going to change, as well as the IVF laboratory is going to change, as ultrasound and testing and consultation can be done remotely, sample collection and brought in within 45 minutes of collection, and bringing those things, instead of having to have rooms there, all of a sudden, how do you repurpose and reorganize that space that now is going to be empty and not as required? And so thinking of your IVF practice in the future as being associated with an enlarged practice of women's health, for example, in male reproductive health, can help transition into a more useful use of your ORs and your other spaces that you've spent so much time. And this really addresses the future of healthcare delivery as it will change in the future. And here I go. So converting to electricity is an important is a critical aspect of being green. Electric energy costs are spiraling upwards. Carbon costs are going way up, and so to invest right now in photovoltaics and using wind energy is actually more and more affordable and achieves more better outcomes. Generators produce a huge amount of gasoline output from fossil fuels as well. So the idea of using battery storage to be able to mitigate overnight usage and not relying so much on generators, but actually generating your own power in an emergency situation produces a much cleaner outcome, but it also makes you independent and not required on a whole series of tests. So a generator you have to test every month for years and years and years for maybe short-term use. So if you use a team inside to track your usage patterns, as were described by some of the efforts that were done either in vitro life or by Roisin's discussion of what was done internally, and also Dani's discussion about what was done internally at their practice of care, you can then identify and put a group together to help you do this. So you don't have to do it by yourself. Material usage requires, is another aspect about that you need to look into, and make sure that you're using locally sourced elements as much as possible and reducing the travel amount. I'll discuss that in a little bit further before, and that was also touched on a bit by Roisin as well. So simple things like putting electrical, I think that a number of my clients have reacted negatively about space detectors and using automated switching when you go in and out of rooms. And yes, it can be frustrating, and the early versions of it were very bad. But now you can set the length and duration of time. So if you're not moving for a half an hour, the lights don't suddenly go off when you're in the bathroom by yourself in your office, and then you have to start waving your hands wildly or get up and actually reactivate it. You can set longer times so that you can still achieve energy cut down in uses. More and more remote meetings. Here we are at I3, having remote meetings will really make a big difference also in this function, and using more remote functions to support your use of space. Changing out your lighting fixtures. Many people still have incandescents. I'm guilty of that, in fact, in my living room. And going to LED functions are going to greatly drop your electrical use. And it also works very much with the potential of photovoltaics. So finally, so most IVF clinics that I know of aren't in industrial areas. They're in very, very high-end areas, and the expenses involved with them are real estate based, and the whole idea of storage and using up space and the cost of real estate to have in-house storage is getting to be more and more difficult. My company TMRW is involved in automated storage of and offsite storage, and are starting to bring centralized storage spaces that are run by and digitally operated and run by technologists that are highly proficient in safe conduct of embryos is our basic idea. So this also will cut down on your transport costs. Cryoport ships something in the neighborhood of 1,000 to 1,200 samples a day. If you think about all the automobile transport and airport transport, it's an enormous number. So if you're shipping more like 400 samples to a single location, you can get a lot more efficient use, cut down on your costs, and also cut down on the transportation costs. This allows you to potentially, if you're using automation in this way, you can change your workforce to not be maintaining frozen samples, but now be utilized to make money more directly. So there's a whole series of associated costs that are involved with this that across your entire program, where an automated solution like this could greatly help and bring your costs down and also change the way in which you're working. So if you take this perspective with VitraLife, you take it with future Gavi, the automated vitrification systems that are now coming online, it's very, very soon that those things will actually affect a greener result by being more efficient and also allowing you to generate more income as well. So these costs are larger than just the rent. Another big aspect is how many sendouts are you doing for PGT? How are you bundling those and how are you sending them out? So these are just some of the aspects of green applications that you can do that are of a larger nature, that are accessible to you, and that are architecturally achieved. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Chip. That was a really fascinating presentation. And I think, you touched there on cryo storage. We know that, a lot of liquid nitrogen is transported to laboratories. Normally each clinic gets around 2 deliveries a week or so. Is it possible to actually integrate things like liquid nitrogen generators into the design of these clinics so that we can actually bring some of the medical gas production in-house? Is that a thing that could be possible in the future, in your view?
70% of our airstream is nitrogen, right? So it is a sensible assumption that you could easily strip it out. They have not been successful yet, and I say they as an industrial group has not been successful creating those that are in a reliable enough sense to be able to do it. However, some new systems that we've seen, and we've been looking into actually doing them for tomorrow's systems, are actually have large enough storage to make sense to be able to do that. So the actual numbers of how many liters are available and how large a system, it takes up quite a bit of footprint. It's fairly noisy and difficult, but I think that they're under development. And I think within the next 5 years, yes, you'll see this happening a great deal more.
And just what about the materials used in clinic design? So can we start to look at utilizing more green materials in the construction of our clinics?
So a very prominent American hospital sheathed its building with glass that required 3 transits of the globe to finally end up on the outside of its building. I've never seen the building published, which is the sort of great panacea of architects and name architecture, is to get something in the press. Yeah. So this incredibly expensive exterior, and I can't imagine what it would be like if somebody shoots a BB gun and puts a hole in this glass. Literally, it went from China to Italy to back to China. It was assembled back in the 3rd country in Europe and then shipped to the United States. So yes, using locally sourced materials is absolutely critical. What's also been interesting is how the supply chain has drastically shifted during COVID. Regularly usable materials, particularly automated materials, have been really, really difficult to get hold of, such as air conditioning systems. So everything that used to be available off the shelf or immediately is now taking months and months and months to achieve. And that all has an energy impact as well in terms of time, weight. I know that a lot of facilities are having difficulties getting doers, for instance, on a timely basis, and are terrified about those changes, that they're needing more storage space and now they're not able to get it.
Yeah, thank you. And now I think it's time for us to go to some questions and answers. And Jacques, it's been unprecedented, I think, the number of questions that we've received. So we're probably not going to be able to go through all of them today, but hopefully we'll be able to address some in tomorrow's session that we don't do today.
Yeah, but I think we have a little bit of time to spend 10, 15 minutes in a panel discussion. So Roisin and Rikard and Vicky, and all the speakers, if all the speakers could please, yeah, there they are. So we have a lot of questions. We definitely cannot go through them. This has been a fantastic panel. So some of the elements that came off, particularly Roisin, for you had so many questions were being asked that we haven't gotten to. So I think Juan Moreno from Oslo is asking, is it possible that media suppliers start to use paper instructions in every single bottle and have an alternative as barcode on bottle that you can, so it sends you the instructions manual to a website? And that's a question for Roisin as well as Rikard. Is that a possibility? Could you comment on that?
I think that definitely is. And even this week we got a new RI pipette handle thing, and it had that exact, it had a QR code on it instead of the product insert. So I guess that is already happening in the industry. But yeah, absolutely. Why do we need a product insert in every single bottle when we order huge batches of it?
And I think also the number of languages that need to be printed on every insert as well. And you have to, it takes time finding the correct language.
Yeah. There's also a question here for you again, Roisin, about from Bronte Stone, who has, I think, attended all of our meetings so far. And he's saying something really fair, which is 50 years ago, we all used more reusable glass culture items before use of disposable plastic made some economic sense. It spared us, of course, much cleaning and sterilizing glassware, but while we do little to spare some carbon footprint, might we now move towards use of recyclable dishes and glassware and tubes rather than disposable?
Yeah, I think that would be a brilliant idea. I think one of the problems with glass is that it's heavier to transport though than plastic. But yeah, but if you had like more use, if you could get multiple use out of it, maybe that would be a possibility. And yeah, like we're culturing embryos in plastic, yeah, we're recommended not to eat out of plastic containers. So how good is it as well for what we're doing?
If I just can add there, I think that is an interesting issue as well from the perspective, from the top-down perspective. What governs our businesses? If we had integrated sustainability earlier on into our business models and our strategies, we could have made different choices, because we need to consider a lot more aspects today. And that's why I think the integration of sustainability in our business plans and strategies for all different actors in the industry is very important. So we consider these issues in every aspect, both in the small things we do, but also in the bigger decisions that can have an impact on bigger series of products and so forth. But also connected to the plastics, I think we're still in an industry where it's heavy regulated, and there's a lot of testing doing connected to it as well. So the risk for plastics to emit toxins or anything else into the media, I think it's really low because of all the testings and the specific types of plastics allowed to be used, because there are many different kinds of plastics.
Is there any look at the greener form of plastics, the biological variations? Does that make sense? Is that something we need to look at? Because we're talking about plastic, but there's plastic and plastic, right? So
yeah. I think that's where we have that's one of the issues or questions that we really have to move together. Because today legislations hinders us from using biodegradable plastics. So we have to move forward as an industry together, putting pressure on the legislators, and also maybe finance together the tests needed, finding the different alternatives that we can use. And also while doing that, considering the different aspects of sustainability. So we don't impact other goals, such as if we start using cornstarch only or primarily when we produce our plastics, we might impact or have the same kind of impact that we saw back in 2007, where the corn prices flew up in the skyrocketed.
Yeah, no, and you know, so certainly research is needed. Also, the knowledge base has to change, and we have to look at what's released in culture medium, and we have to look at what's the shelf life. Is that if that's shortened, then obviously that's counterproductive. So a lot of aspects to it. It's very complex, I understand. So you think both in Europe and the US, you think the regulators are very wary of this and have a really major voice? I'm a little surprised.
I think although our industry has a big impact, as previous talkers shown, we're not the primary industry that's under the scrutiny of legislators as of now. They're starting with the more heavy industries, looking at the EU taxonomy, for example. We as a specific industry is not included yet. We will be, and some of our products already are. But I think that we need to, the healthcare industry and the IVF industry especially, need to move together before the legislators make the first move. I think in order for us to move align with the Sustainable Development Goals and reach them.
Yeah, so many centers are now designed with the idea of just-in-time delivery of elements and using plastics instead of using autoclaving of reusable materials. And I mean, that was certainly the approach for operating rooms 20 and 30 years ago. But now it's become more and more reliant on the plastics industry. Being able to shift back to that a little bit is really just a matter of equipment purchasing and processing. So there's a great deal that could be taken out while still using plastics where it's most effective.
I think there also could be a little bit of a, just thinking on that, actually going from back to sort of single use, going back to autoclaving and cleaning yourself. I don't know if there's a little bit of a stigma behind it. Almost you kind of think it's a little bit dirty and not actually getting everything off. Whereas if you get a brand new, fresh bit of plastic, that like even now I want to feel like, oh no, it's exactly the same. It makes no difference. But there's that little stigma in my mind that kind of thinks actually, like, is it as clean? Is it as good? Which I think will take a bit of time to get people to change their perspective on it. So I think that might be quite a sort of a difficult hurdle to overcome before we can go back to that.
And Dani, did you ever think that your work would have spun into this amount of interest?
Well, I hoped it would. I hoped it would, just because when I was doing it was because it was just all in the newspapers, plastic everywhere, killing the turtles. And so I looked into it, but I always have been thinking about it. And I'm so pleased that other people have as well, because spend one day in the IVF lab and you see how un-eco-friendly we are. So I'm really pleased that sort of people are really looking into this and sort of looking for change.
There's a real irony that the future, the children that we're bringing in to the world via IVF, we're also polluting the way into it. So this is an irony.
It's quite ironic.
Well, we hope to make a change. I think this is a good start here. We hope to make a change in all that. So maybe, Emma, it's been an hour and 45 minutes. Let's maybe close this session. I think we have a repeat tomorrow, but if you could take us close this session. And I'll give you some final words later.
Okay, thank you, Jacques. So I think just before we end, we would all like to thank everyone who took part in this webinar. So Roisin, Dani, Rikard, Chip, Jacques, Giles in the background, who is behind the scenes, and of course our sponsored talk by Vitrolife. And thanks also to all the other members of the organising committee of this initiative, I3, who are Peter Nage, Shaista Sadridan, and Marianne Savites. I knew I was going to say that wrong, one of those words wrong. But thank you very much for pulling this together. It's been a fantastic session, I think, really enlightening and shining a much needed light on an extremely important topic. So thank you.
And thank you to you, Emma. It was wonderful to have you with us. So we had 3 experts that are slightly outside the IVF field or completely outside, and 3 embryologists. And so I think this was a great mix, and hopefully more to come. You're free to join us tomorrow, but it's at 9 p.m. EST tomorrow. We'll have a repeat of this session with other panelists as well. Only bad when you're in the UK, really, or in Western Europe, Eastern Europe. But if you're in the rest of the world, that means you have time to join us. Particularly, we do this for you to join us from California, because we always have these sessions when it's noontime in California, and that's kind of tricky. So they have told us so many times, can you please put us in the California evening? So that's what we're trying to do. So we're repeating the session tomorrow. Tomorrow is Groundhog Day, so it'll be similar, but with more guests. Thank you for joining, and please join us tomorrow. And next week, at the same time, we will be here talking about corporate IVF. That's a heavy topic, like today, with per diem embryologist Kathy Miller and TJ Farn, who is boss of Prelude, and more. So follow the site and look at your app. We have this little app that you can now have on your phone, so you can see what's going on and get notifications and things like that. So thank you all very much, everyone. And see you next week. See you tomorrow if you want to hear more about sustainability in green IVF. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.